Good afternoon and welcome to the Gazette Mail Candidate Forum, candidates for Senate District 17 representing much of Kanawha County. We are here for up to an hour to interview, discuss with the candidates. And so we'll have y'all introduce yourself and we'll ask a few questions and just have a nice discussion. And this will be the basis for a story in probably tomorrow's paper, as well as decisions on the Daily Mail and Gazette editorials, endorsements closer to the election. My name is Kelly Merritt. I am editorial page editor for the Daily Mail site.
I'm Whitney Burdett. I'm an editorial writer for the Daily Mail opinion page.
I'm Dawn Miller. I'm the Gazette opinion page editor.
And Eric Gare, I'm a State House reporter at the Gazette Mail.
Oh, and there's Lisa. Mr. Palumbo, if you would introduce yourself and say a minute and a half while you're running.
Okay, I'm Corey Palumbo. I'm a lawyer in Charleston. I currently serve in the Senate in the 17th District. I'm just finishing up my second term. The reason that I have run in the past and run again is just the same reason that most people run. I mean, I'm concerned about West Virginia. I'm concerned about opportunities for people in West Virginia. We're going through a particularly difficult time right now with our budget lagging because of coal severance taxes and natural gas severance taxes. And I want to see our state prosper. I want to see opportunities for people in the state, and I think we need to make tough decisions to fix our budget, to balance our budget. We need to invest in our infrastructure to help make more attractive places for people, not just roads, but with broadband access. I mean, I think we've got a lot of work we need to do. We've done a lot of good things in West Virginia over the last few years, not Democrat and Republican control. I think we've done a lot of good things, but there's a lot more we need to do.
I'm Chris Stansberry, and I'm currently serving in the House of Delegates, just finishing up my first term. And I am from Charleston. I grew up in South Charleston, graduated from GW, went to West Virginia University, got a biology degree there, and then went to the Southern College of Optometry, and graduated from optometry school in 2003. Married my college sweetheart. We've been married 16 years. We have 2 children. My oldest boy is Grant, and he's 9, and the youngest Reed's getting ready to turn 5 later on this month. There are 2 big reasons why I decided to run for the House and now for the Senate. Just thinking about their futures here in West Virginia and the opportunities that they may or may not have. I have an older brother, and right after he graduated from WU with his master's, he ended up moving to North Carolina to find a job. And that always kind of hurt, seeing him pack up and move off. I'd love to have him here close by. He's got a young family like I do, and we'd love to be closer to them. So that's just one of many stories that you hear. We do a great job educating our kids, and off they go to some hinterlands to get a job. And so that's kind of scary, being a dad and thinking about my kids growing up here and then moving off somewhere else to trying to find gainful employment. I'm an optometrist. I have a practice here based out of Charleston, West Virginia, and we started in 2011. My partner and I and 1 employee, and now we've been very blessed. We have 6 locations, and we have 6 doctors and over 50 employees. So as a small business owner and as a doctor, looking from the inside out, I was really concerned with the way things were going in healthcare, very concerned with the way that things were going in the business community, and really wanted to be able to work with the legislature to try to improve the economic environment here in West Virginia so that small businesses can do a better job prospering and hiring our people, and do a better job on the healthcare side of things, improving access to healthcare, and trying to create a better healthcare system in West Virginia so that more people out in the rural and in our more urban communities can have access to healthcare.
Very good. I guess we've been starting with the incumbent for whatever reason, but you get reelected in this case, and the question will be for you too. You get elected, and the Senate leadership says, "Okay, Senator from District 17, I'm giving you one thing that I guarantee, we're going to pass." So, what is it that you want to make sure? You just had one thing you could be assured, one bill that you could assure would be passed in the legislature. What would it be?
I would like to see us come up with funding to develop our infrastructure. The Senate passed a bill last year that would have enabled us to do a lot of road work. The House did not pass it. I don't know if that was the right mechanism to fund road projects, but it was one option that was out there. I would like to see us find the money to invest in our infrastructure, not just roads, but broadband and internet access too.
For me, I'd like to see a comprehensive substance abuse package passed. Something that would deal both with the supply side and the demand side. It's one of the reasons I ran in the first place. It's one of the reasons I'm running again. I have a real passion in my heart for the folks dealing with the substance abuse epidemic because it transcends all boundaries, all socioeconomic and political and race and everything. And it's been so devastating on the state of West Virginia. There's some good things that have come down over the last couple of years. We've passed some programs that have improved access to care, passed some programs that have helped the folks in the criminal justice system get through substance abuse treatment before they're released. So we're doing some good things, but we're just barely scratched the surface. I think we need to do a more comprehensive job at taking a look at, like I said, both the supply side, trying to do education, prevention, especially with the younger children, working with the adults and the folks that have already been exposed to illicit narcotics and doing a better job providing treatment for them. And then also working on the criminal justice side and taking a look at our code and making sure that we have proper penalties in place for those that would traffic in narcotics and bring those to our communities and expose our kids to that. I think we can do all of that in a comprehensive fashion, and we've been doing it kind of piecemeal so far, but that's what I would look to do.
Very good. I'm one of those always looks at the Daily Mail side is the pro-growth. Not that the Gazette's not. Excuse me, I didn't mean to say that. But we focus on pro-growth economic or government policy and so on, and
So do we.
and less regulatory. No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak for the Gazette side. But I look at things. The best thing we can do to reduce substance abuse may be more jobs. And the best thing we can do for a lot of revenue problems is create the environment for more jobs. And just from the economic perspective, what can the 2017 legislature do to make West Virginia a place where more jobs are available for citizens? Start with you.
As a small business owner, the challenges that we face starting a business and the challenges that we face operating a business revolve around regulation, revolve around taxes, revolve around the red tape and the hoops that you have to jump through to run a business. And so I think everyday average citizens are out there. They may have a good idea for starting a business, but they're afraid to deal with all that. They don't know exactly how to navigate the systems to get their business up and running. And so one of the things we have to take a look at, and we've been doing some of that, is look at how the Secretary of State's office processes business applications and how we deal with the treasurer and taxes. Are there things that we could do to streamline the business startup process? You see that advertised that other states are doing things to provide a streamlined startup process to get businesses up and running faster. So I think we have to take a look at that. We have to take a look at creating new sources of capital investment for these businesses, whether that's public-private partnerships, whether that is through federal grants. At the high level, we need to have somebody who's in charge of looking at those programs and then working with these would-be business owners and trying to find a way that they could make those packages work for them to get their businesses up and running faster. Small business is the lifeblood of West Virginia. They provide more jobs in West Virginia than anything else. So we have to give those folks the tools that they need to be able to get those up and running. And oftentimes it's just getting out of the way. The regulatory environment sometimes is just so onerous that business owners would rather start a business in another state rather than have to deal with the hoops here in West Virginia. So if you can clear some of that red tape out of the way, I think you're going to see an increase in the number of small businesses, and you're going to see a number of entrepreneurs out there who have those ideas and have been afraid to get the business started, beginning to get those started, and those are going to provide jobs much needed to solve a lot of the issues, both on the revenue side and the substance abuse side.
I agree with some of what Delegate Stansberry said. I mean, I think that to the extent there are regulations that don't provide any benefit to the citizens of the state and just provide hindrances to businesses to start up, we need to look at those. This past session, I think we repealed 150 or so regulations that were on the books but not really used. I mean, I think we can probably do more of that. I think this goes along with what the first answer I gave. I think we need to invest in our infrastructure. I think that having crumbling roads and being one of the worst states for high-speed internet access hurts our ability to have businesses start up and to attract businesses. I think once we invest in those things, I think we'll be a more likely place to have more economic activity. The other thing I would say is, I was at a conference in the spring, I think it was, that Tech Connect had, and they had, Brad Smith was there, and the CEO of Gallup was there, and he really made a fascinating presentation. He talked about a test that Gallup has come up with that can identify, who has the innate capability to be a successful entrepreneur. And it's essentially 5 out of 1,000 people, he said. And no matter who you test, man, woman, black, white, rich, poor, it doesn't matter. 5 out of 1,000 have the capability, the innate traits to be a successful entrepreneur. And his point was, we're investing all this money and time into the best, football players and basketball players and baseball players, but we don't invest any time or effort into training, who could be the job creators. And he thinks that's, going to be what can help revitalize America. I believe that could be what we could do to revitalize West Virginia. Gallup's working with WVU right now on that test to try to get it out to kids in West Virginia so we can identify them. We need to get the curriculum in place so these kids that we identify can then reach their potential as job creators. And he was like, I'm not talking about, people who are just a one-person operation. These are people we think can create companies that can be 100 jobs, 200 jobs. So if we can identify those people, if we can give them the other skills that they need, then I think we can revitalize our economy.
Sure. Were there any specific regulations or taxes in there that you'd like to see removed?
I know I've had some discussion with some people on the environmental side that maybe want to open a recycling business or open up some sort of processing facility for, let's say, natural gas liquids or something like that. And they've relayed the story to me that the system that we have just takes much longer to navigate than a place like North Carolina, where the system they have is just easier. You fast track the system. It seems like that other states do a better job where the agencies work together. And it's almost like we need a liaison or just better communication between the DEP and the Secretary of State's office and the Department of Revenue, whatever it is, there's different agencies to work together to process these applications faster.
Okay, so let's talk about the state budget then. Excuse me, I'm so froggy today. You answered on our little questionnaire, you said you weren't really in favor of any tax increases. We need to be leaner, more efficient, anything. So are there specific things in state government you would cut? What are those?
Sure. I mean, one of the things we've been looking at recently, there's an ongoing audit in the state vehicle program, looking at our motor fleet and trying to make sense of where these vehicles are located, which agencies have them, what are they being utilized for, and it's not very apparent in some cases what they're actually being utilized for, what the purpose of the vehicle is, how often it's utilized. And so that's one of the things that we've been looking at on the House side to say, is there an opportunity there to streamline the motor pool process or change the way that we authorize the use of vehicles so that we can decrease the fleet, decrease the maintenance, and make it so that we have a fleet of vehicles that makes sense for the size of government that we really need. So that's one instance. I mean, I'm sure there are multiple vehicles out there that may do a lot of idle time. The state's paid a lot of money for them, but they just sit a lot. So why have a vehicle dedicated to a specific person in a specific agency when they don't use it 20 weeks out of the year or 30 weeks out of the year when it just sits? Why not have a motor pool that they could go and say, hey, I need to drive to Marlinton next week, I need a car, and they make a reservation basically to take one of the state vehicles over to Marlinton rather than have a vehicle sitting around all the time. So I think there's certainly things there that we could streamline and refine.
Right, which the state also has, right? A motor pool where you can...
It does, but yeah, I don't think we do a good job as far as saying who can have the vehicle and how often they can have it, or can they have it full time.
Okay. Anything else on your list of specifics?
Well, I think part of the thing that I've been working on is substance abuse, and one of the things that goes lockstep with that is the criminal justice system. And one of the bills that I sponsored last session was to give judges more discretion with their mandatory minimum sentences. As you know, it costs $24,000 or $26,000 to house somebody in one of our state penitentiaries every year. And a lot of times you have somebody who has maybe been a first-time offender, who is a nonviolent offender, got caught up in a bad situation, so to speak, but the judge has not had any discretion for that mandatory minimum sentence. They can't say, look, based on my judgment, this gentleman is honestly has been caught up with the wrong crowd, and he's not necessarily a hardened felon. Let's not give him 5 years, 10 years, whatever the mandatory minimum is. Let's give him a suspended sentence in a year of incarceration, or let's commit him to community service, or so. We want to be tough on crime, but at the same time, that comes at a big cost. When you're talking about housing people, around the clock for $25,000 a year, we have to look at our criminal justice code and say, is it really necessary to keep these folks locked up? Is there not a better way that we can handle it? And are there other issues that these people are dealing with, like substance abuse or mental illness, that has led them to this place in the first place? And should we not be treating that rather than just locking them up where they won't get the help that they need?
Can I interject one question, then back to you? Chris, those two suggestions that you, recommendations that you have, what's your estimated cost savings if you could implement them fully, both of those?
The motor pool, I'm not sure. I mean, that's the state vehicle system is still kind of unfolding, so I'm not really sure what type of cost savings we'll eventually uncover there. As far as the being able to choose which mandatory minimum sentence to follow, again, $25,000 a year for somebody that's going to be incarcerated. You have the ability to give those judges the discretion to do that. If they do that for only 5% of their cases and they see 1,000 people a year, I mean, the cost savings can be significant to the state. So I don't have hard numbers on that, but we know that all those things can add up to some significant cost savings.
Okay, so really I was asking about how to solve the hole in the budget. So cuts or taxes or whatever, what would you like to do, Senator?
Well, I just think we need to be open-minded to all the possibilities. I mean, I think that the cuts that Delegate Stansbury discusses, I would agree with both of those. I mean, if we can reduce our vehicle fleet, that's great. If we can provide some more flexibility for substance abuse, people who've been convicted of substance abuse crimes, I mean, I think that would be good too. But I think that's probably going to be a very small piece of the puzzle. From what I understand from talking to Delegate Nelson a couple of days ago, is what's expected to be in excess of a $400 million shortfall next year. So, I mean, I think you can do some small things, and maybe we have to do another across-the-board cut, which is what we've done the last few years. But I don't see how we're going to do that without being open to some increased revenue possibilities. And, no one wants to raise taxes. I mean, I certainly don't. I was proud to support the reduction of the corporate net income tax, the elimination of the business franchise tax, the elimination of the food tax. And at the time, we could afford to do all that, and we did it, and I was happy we did it. But now we're in a situation where it's a much tighter situation. It's going to be much more difficult to balance the budget. And I don't think many people realistically believe that we can balance the budget just by making further cuts.
So any sources of revenue that you think are particularly good ideas?
I mean, I think we did the one that was the best idea this year with the tobacco tax. We had a tobacco tax that was 1/3 of the national average. We've got one of the highest smoking rates in the country, and raising that to me just made sense. Now, could we raise it further up to the national average? Yeah, I think we probably could, and maybe we should do that. Should we look at alcohol taxes? Yeah, maybe. Should we look at the cell phone tax that Governor Tomlin suggested? I mean, I don't think a lot of people love that idea, but I mean, I don't think we can be closed-minded to any of the possibilities, because this is a very, very difficult budget that whoever's there next year is going to have to deal with.
Can I do one follow-up?
Sure.
Chris, you were one of the signers of the Grover Norquist anti-tax pledge. And I believe you voted against the cigarette tax to balance the budget, or essentially voted against the budget bill. What is, so your position is, you still maintain that same position?
I haven't signed a
And why?
pledge this time.
You did or didn't?
I have not this time.
There's a would you have to sign it every year?
It's every time you run for a different office.
Okay.
So but I didn't sign it this time.
Maybe you can talk then why you signed it before and why you didn't sign it this time.
I mean, sure, as a new candidate, you're inundated with surveys and pledges and all sorts of stuff. And as a new candidate, for the first time running, you tend to fill out a lot of that stuff. And then as a repeat candidate, you tend to find out that maybe that's not necessarily the best thing to do because, you know, how much does it help and how much does it hurt? Has my philosophy on taxes changed? No, it hasn't. I mean, I still believe that we didn't do everything we could do during the legislative session to decrease our spending. And that was one of the primary reasons I voted against the cigarette tax, because still up until the last hour before the cigarette tax vote, there were still ideas floated around about areas that could be cut. And they had a spreadsheet that they were passing around of different cuts at different levels that could save, you know, $100 million, which was the equivalent of what the cigarette tax was. So I didn't feel like we had exhausted every option at that point to cut, to cut spending and fill the hole in the budget. Philosophically, I'm against tax increases. I mean, I think that, you know, the cigarette tax is a regressive tax. It tends to decrease your cigarette tax revenue over time. Because one thing, people are quitting, which is great. I mean, I don't like cigarettes. I detest cigarettes. I wish everybody would quit. But when you raise the cigarette tax, some people are going to quit. So your revenues that you generate initially are going to begin to decline again. You're losing sales that you, especially along the border counties, where you had a lot of small businesses that depended on cigarettes, unfortunately, for people to come in and shop in their stores. And while they're there, they may not buy just a pack of cigarettes or a carton of cigarettes. They may also gas up their car or buy the groceries for the week. So you had a lot of small businesses along the border counties there of states that had a higher cigarette tax where they were doing a tidy business. And so again, you're going to see a decrease in sales tax as you lose some of those, decrease in gas taxes, you lose the gas that we sell. So, you know, you're going to lose a number of things as that tax takes effect. I had a patient in Beckley tell me that she was more than likely going to be laid off because she works for a distribution company that sells products, including cigarettes, to all these mom and pop grocery stores. She's based out of Bluefield. And she said, look, my boss came to me and said, hey, because of that cigarette tax, said I might lose my job. And I said, seriously, what's going on? She said, well, they're probably going to have to decrease our workforce because we're not doing as much business as we used to. So it's, you know, it's not a tax that doesn't hurt anybody. It obviously hurts a lot of folks, and I opposed it for that reason. And going forward, again, I oppose the increase in taxes because we haven't done the job that we need to do to get control of our spending. Now, I'm in support of comprehensive tax reform. Now, if we can have a revenue-neutral tax reform package that broadens the base but does not increase the taxes on any specific group of people, then most studies would suggest that you're going to increase your economic opportunities in the state by doing so. And as you increase economic opportunities, businesses do more business, sell more goods, and your tax base, your tax revenues increase. But just to increase the tax because we're not willing to do the hard work to cut away at the budget, I thought was the wrong thing to do.
You want to follow up on that before we move on?
Well, I mean, are you talking to me or Eric?
Both, really, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I mean, I'll say, I agree, this legislature was not willing to do the hard work to fix the budget. I mean, that was apparent when we spent 3 weeks in special session and we ended up with a budget that cut $35 million out of the $270 million shortfall and then borrowed the rest of it or took it from our savings account. I mean, there was a severe lack of leadership dealing with the budget this year. So I agree. I mean, we've got to make the tough decisions. The tough decisions are making cuts where we can make cuts, and if we have to raise revenue, we have to raise revenue. But I mean, just taking, it was essentially 91% of the shortfall from one-time funds, I thought was appalling in the lack of leadership. Now, the budget we finally passed, it was a little bit better, a little bit more balanced, I think a little bit more palatable to more people. And I supported the budget as we ultimately passed it. But I mean, we've got to be willing to make the tough decisions on both sides to fix our budget.
Wait, you have a chance.
Before the meeting started, we were kind of talking about how big the district is. You said it was south of the Kanawha River, and can you guys kind of go over that again?
East of the Oak, really from St. Albans all the way to Montgomery,
Okay.
all along the southern border, all the way down to.
So that's a pretty huge district. How do you make sure that all of your constituents are equally represented when you have such a large district and many rural pockets and parts of Charleston included. How do you balance all that? Is there an easy way?
Well, no, I mean, I don't think there's any easy way. I mean, I think you try to talk to as many people as you can. You try to be responsive when people call your office, and you try to be responsive when people send you emails. I mean, it's difficult because, I mean, I'm sure it's the same way for Delegate Stansberry. I mean, we get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails, so it's really difficult to respond to all of them. But, I mean, you get a sense for what's going on in your district just from talking to people. And I think what's good for, for Charleston and South Charleston, if we're talking about, providing better health, better education, better economic opportunities, it's good for the whole district.
Just part of my campaign experience, I've been working up and down the valley, trying to make sure that A, people know my name, it's part of campaigning, but B, just to find out what's going on, to find out, test the pulse of the Upper Kanawha Valley, because, my 35th House District is the western portion, really, of the Senate District. And so from about halfway through Kanawha City all the way to St. Albans is my district now. So through the campaign process and through the last couple of years in the legislature, I've garnered pretty good attention and support from that area because I've tried to be responsive. Now, like Tori said, it's difficult because your volume of calls and emails and everything is so high. But my experience, again, campaigning up through the Upper Kanawha Valley, trying to talk to as many folks as possible, what they relay to me is that they feel forgotten. They relay that they feel like their area of the Kanawha Valley doesn't matter because they're not the big producers anymore. When the coal mines were going, when the chemical plants were going at full capacity, they felt like they got more attention because they were generating more revenues. But they felt like as those industries have declined and their production has decreased, they feel like they matter less. Whether or not that's true or not, whether or not that's just perception, I don't know. But that is their perception, and that is what they believe. And so I've been trying to assure them that, look, I understand that you feel forgotten, but we are all one Kanawha County. We're all one Kanawha Valley. If part of us declines and fails, it hurts everybody. And so we have to be diligent to make sure that we're reaching out through the local mayors, through the city councils, and we as representatives of the 35th or the 17th have to make sure that we have those conversations with the other elected officials and going to those civic groups and trying to pay special attention to, the outlying areas so they don't feel like Charleston gets everything and we don't get anything. So that's been my focus during the campaign process and through my service in the 35th. And it's time intensive, and but it's a labor of love. And you want to make sure that people understand that you care and that you want to be as responsive as you can to them.
I'm going to ask specifically for you, Mr. Delegate Stansberry. You served one term now. Why the goal to move to the Senate?
Well, part of being in the House is being one of 100. And sometimes it's a challenge to have your voice heard. Sometimes it's a challenge to move things ahead when you're one of 100. So certainly part of being in the Senate is being one of 34. And you have a louder voice. You have a larger opportunity, I believe, to move an agenda forward. And for me, I've been trying to focus on revitalizing the Valley and tackling the substance abuse epidemic here in the Valley. I've been holding community forums. We've had several over the last year, just outreach, talking to people, not necessarily just in the 35th, but all up and down the Kanawha Valley. And that problem has continued to grow, even though we've worked hard to tackle it. It's continued to grow. It's continued to affect a greater number of people. And so, my heart goes out to them, and I want to be able to represent a larger number of constituents, a larger portion of the county, to have a bigger impact on the citizenry here in Kanawha County.
If you have anything to say, why another term?
Well, I mean, I'll say, as compared to the House and the Senate's much better, so I understand the desire to be in the Senate. I mean, the Senate is in my experience, been a more collegial place to be. It's a place where you do have more impact over policy, and I think you have much better impact and better ability to get things done and to help make improvements to the state.
And am I correct? You served 3 terms in the House? So that was 6 years, and you've completed at the end of your first term in the Senate.
Second term.
Second term. Okay, so you're seeking a third term. Okay, so it would be 14 years?
That's right.
Okay. Start with you, Delegate Stansberry, and then this question will go to you a little bit modified. You served. You ran for election the first time. I believe it was the first time you ever run for public office. Correct. And you won. And from my observation as an observer of the legislature, I think you made yourself an effective delegate. What have you learned that you didn't know when you started this, and how could that make you a better senator? And then, same question, what have you learned over the years, and how does it make you more effective?
I think when you're first elected, I think when you first get into the House or the Senate, you think you can do it all. You think you can just, lift the ship yourself. But I realized pretty early on that policy doesn't move by yourself, unless you have a team of individuals who are like-minded and are willing to pull for this piece of legislation. It's not going to move. And so I found out very early on, and one of the first bills that I introduced was a bill to get substance abuse treatment into the Division of Corrections. And I found that, just trying to introduce that piece of legislation, not only could I not move it just by myself, but it wasn't a quality piece of legislation until I pulled in people from the DOC, from the Adult Drug Court, from the Supreme Court, from the substance abuse treatment community. I had a draft that I thought was great, was going to solve all our problems. But then they looked at and they started shooting holes in it. They're like, well, you didn't think about this, and you didn't think about this. So it really takes a team approach to craft a piece of legislation. It takes a team approach to get something passed. And for me, it was about bipartisanship. Substance abuse is a big bipartisan issue because it doesn't just affect red or blue. It doesn't affect black or white. It affects all of us. And so I found that there's a tremendous desire by all the delegates in the House that I've worked with, and the folks in the Senate, to get these pieces of legislation through. So you can certainly build a lot more momentum when you have both sides pulling together than you can if it's just a strict partisan bill. And so I found that to be true for substance abuse. I started the West Virginia Legislative Sportsmen's Caucus, and I found that for hunting and fishing and recreational shooting and outdoors activities, having Democrats and Republicans working together makes things so much better. The legislation that we craft is better, and the opportunities to move those pieces of legislation through the House and into the Senate, it just works better. So that's one of my points of focus. One of the things I've learned from the service in the House, and one of the things I definitely want to take into the Senate is the ability to team build and to work in a bipartisan fashion to get these things done.
Good. What you've learned over the years?
I would have probably similar things to say. I guess what I learned initially when I started in the House was that, when you're reading the paper, you think all these issues that come before the legislature are really contentious, and that's most of what goes on. And you learn very quickly that most of what goes on are routine bills that pass the House 100-0 or pass the Senate 34-0. So there's a little bit of a misperception out there about really what constitutes most of the legislature's time, because most of what we do are things that we can all agree on. What I'd also say is, I think that the time I've been in the legislature, I've worked well with Democrats and Republicans. When we were in the majority, we would always work with Republicans, seek their ideas and inputs on bills, and pass the best legislation we could. And I think that over the last couple of years with Republicans in the majority, sometimes they've worked with us and we've passed things that I think are good, and sometimes they have not. And I think it's always better when you seek the other side's opinion to see what are the potential pitfalls in a piece of legislation that we can maybe work through. So I think it's always better if you can, if you're not trying to jam something through that's a right-wing agenda or necessarily a left-wing agenda, but try to work together to produce the best product you can.
So with the Republican majority, what's the worst thing that got passed the past two sessions? And for you, it'll be what's the best thing that got passed?
The worst thing.
Or you can modify the question.
I would say that the two things I thought were the worst were, one, the bill to get rid of the concealed carry permits. I think that is a very radical piece of legislation that only 5 or 6 states have done. The law enforcement uniformly opposed it. It's going to make their jobs more difficult. I think that's one of the, and that's not just necessarily a Republican thing. There are plenty of Democrats who voted for that too. So I'm not going to just point the finger at them, but that's one of the worst things I think we did. And the second worst, I'd say, was getting rid of prevailing wage. That's a law that 30-some states have in place that protects local contractors and construction workers. I supported the bill in 2015 that modified how we calculated prevailing wage. And I think that we need to make sure it's an appropriate level. But then to get rid of that once that had only been in place for 4 or 5 months, I think was the wrong thing to do. I think you've seen a school project in Wayne County that's being completed by workers from Mexico and Honduras. I mean, our local workers are not getting the work they used to get because of the repeal of prevailing wage. I think that was a mistake.
And the best thing the Republican majority.
I think over the last couple of sessions, we've really taken a hard look at all of the substance abuse issues that we have here in the state, and that's been one of my pet projects. And so I have to say that passing non-prescription naloxone and passing the Good Samaritan Act were two of the best things that we could do to try to slow down the substance abuse epidemic. And the reason being is that naloxone, for anybody that may not know, I'm sure you all do, but is an overdose antidote drug. And so for somebody that's overdosed on opioids, somebody that's overdosed on heroin, a shot of naloxone or a spray of naloxone up the nose jets to the brain, dislocates those that heroin or that opioid from those opioid receptors, and helps the person start breathing again. Because the reason people die of an overdose is because they stop breathing. And so it's a wonderful drug, and it is wonderful because it gives people second chances. It works hand in hand with the Good Samaritan Project, the Good Samaritan Bill, because before that, we used to have a lot of body dumps. Somebody would overdose, they were using together, and somebody would overdose, and they wouldn't call the police. They wouldn't call the paramedics. They wouldn't take them to the hospital. That dead person would be dumped out beside the road somewhere, or they might be dumped at the hospital. I mean, there was reports of people being found in front of ER entrances where whoever they were partying with, they took them and dumped them in front of the hospital. Nobody came in to alert them that they were there, but they did. And the reason was because they didn't want to go to jail. They said, gosh, if I call the cops, I call the paramedics, they're going to say, these guys are in here partying, they're using heroin, and they're going to lock us all up. But with the Good Samaritan Act, those people are given a release from that criminal liability, and they are able to call the police. And even if they are in possession of illicit narcotics, EMS shows up, revives their friend, takes them to the hospital, they won't face charges for that. And so we're seeing a lot less of those body dumps, and we're seeing a lot more, or getting a lot more phone calls now for revivals to bring somebody back with the use of naloxone. If you can't bring them back, you can't get them into recovery, and so that's key. And so I think those two together have done more for the substance abuse epidemic than anything else we've done so far.
Chris, can you just briefly address what Cora said about the concealed carry? I can't remember. That was the one we knew that was going to pass, but I think you voted for that.
I did.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you talk about why you voted for it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean.
And then maybe prevailing wage too. Right. I don't remember exactly how all 100 of you voted, but
Sure.
So I apologize.
No, that's fine. Yeah. On the concealed carry bill. First thing to note is that West Virginia is an open carry state. That means that anybody without training can strap a gun on their hip and walk down the street with it. And that's been around for a long time. But the moment you put a jacket on and cover that gun up, you're a felon. And so what the concealed carry bill did was give those people the ability to carry concealed without facing criminal charges. It didn't change who could carry. Prohibited people are still prohibited people. So if you are a felon, if you're a domestic violence person, you're still prohibited from carrying that firearm. And if you're carrying a firearm in the commission of a crime, you're still going to do hard time. We actually increased the penalties that people would face for gun crime with that bill. So it didn't lax the law as far as who was able to carry. All it did was change how you could carry. Now, what people didn't understand is that the permitless concealed carry doesn't give you reciprocity. And so if you want to be able to carry that gun across state lines to another state that allows concealed carry, you better get a permit, because you're going to be in big trouble if you carry it across state lines without the permit. So the majority of people are still going to get their permit because they want to be able to take their weapon with them on the road if they travel. Now, where the permitless concealed carry really wins is when you have somebody that's a victim of domestic abuse who may not be able to get that concealed carry class from the NRA instructor, get to the sheriff's office, apply for it, pay for it, in time to save their life. They may be a victim of domestic violence because they didn't have time to get the proper permitting, or they're carrying and putting themselves in legal jeopardy. So it really helps in that situation. or people that may not have the means as far as the financial means to pay for the class and the permitting process. I still encourage everybody who's going to carry concealed to get a class, to learn what you're doing, make sure that you know how to use your firearm responsibly. And I think the majority of people that voted for that would do that as well. So that's what that bill does. More states have picked it up and passed it around the country. Missouri just overrode a governor's veto on that. And so I think we're going to see more and more of that, because basically people see it as having to pay a tax to put a coat on over your firearm. Now, for the prevailing wage, we worked in earnest with the folks from the unions in an effort to reform the prevailing wage in 2015, and came up with a system using Marshall, using WU, to try to make prevailing wage a fairer representation of what the actual wages are out there. And we didn't vote to eliminate prevailing wage the first time around. We really did make an effort to reform that system. But what we found is that people were using end arounds to get around that new system. It was pretty much being run the same way it was previously. And so then, once we found that that new system wasn't going to work, then the next step was to eliminate the prevailing wage altogether. And the reason is because we weren't being responsible with the taxpayers' money. We found that through economic studies that these prevailing wage projects were costing taxpayers more money than if they had used private construction dollars. And we heard story after story where the way that these systems were set up is that when the state money came in, it became a prevailing wage project. Like, for instance, at the Sissonville Fire Department, that was one of the stories that we heard, where their fire station burned down, unfortunately, and they had raised some money to build that back together, and they were going to do some of it with volunteers, some of it with donated materials. But once they took some money from the state for that, then prevailing wage kicked in, and they couldn't afford to complete the project. And we had mayors of small towns, South Charleston, for instance, coming to us and saying, hey, listen, we can't build a porch on a school, we can't build a fire station, we can't afford to do these projects by hiring them out and going through the prevailing wage system. So we actually employ carpenters and brick masons to go and do these projects ourselves, and we're completing them at a percentage less than what it would cost to go through the prevailing wage system. So it was an effort to be more responsible with the taxpayers' money to make sure that they're getting the best bang for their buck. And the system, I think, is going to work very well. We've got to give it some more time to find out.
Sure. You mentioned healthcare early on, and I was wondering if what both of you think is sort of next in line for healthcare access for West Virginians. We just had a story the other day about West Virginia doing better than most states on expanding access to health insurance through the Affordable Care Act. So I'd just like to hear what your thoughts are on that subject.
Well, I was happy to see that both of the gubernatorial candidates are comfortable with keeping the expanded Medicaid in place. I think there was a little bit of controversy when Governor Tomlin decided to do that, but the significant reduction in our uninsured population, I think, has been a great benefit to the state of West Virginia. I know that it's going to be more expensive for us to keep up with that, but I was glad to see that they're both committed to doing that. I think we need to focus on the main issues that we all know about. I mean, what Douglas Stansbury talks about with drug abuse, I mean, that's a big health issue. Obesity, that's a big health issue. Our smoking rate, that's a big issue. I mean, we just need to keep devoting time and resources to education efforts, to outreach. Douglas Stansbury helped support a bill that we passed on shared use, allowing people to have access to schools after hours for recreational activities. I mean, I think that's positive for obesity. I mean, we just like in every other area, I mean, we've got major health challenges that we need to keep focused on.
In my opinion, removing the federal government's involvement in a lot of what we do in West Virginia healthcare would go a long way to improving access to healthcare. Part of the problem as a provider that we face is an increasing amount of paperwork and regulation.
As a provider, you're talking about from your private perspective.
Yeah, that's right. As an eye doctor, we fall under the same Medicare, Medicaid guidelines as everybody else. And so you're required now to use special softwares. You're required now to process certain types of quality reporting initiatives. And all these things take more time, all these things take more staff, all these things cost more money, all these things raise the overhead of private practitioners. And you've seen a flood of private practitioners running from rural health communities to hospitals because it's been so overwhelming. A lot of these guys and gals out there practicing in the rural parts of the state are giving up their private practice and joining a hospital because of how cumbersome and how expensive these regulatory changes have been. So in my mind, the more we pile on these doctors, the less time they spend taking care of patients and the more time they spend dealing with the red tape. The new regulations that are beginning to trickle in are only going to worsen the problem. And you're going to begin to see small hospitals go out of business. And you're going to begin to see small hospitals being gobbled up by larger hospitals. We're already seeing that here in the state. And as that happens, small providers, again, are leaving the rural community and going into the bigger cities where these hospitals are located. So in my opinion, we are doing harm to access to care, not helping access to care. Now, yeah, there are some positive numbers out there as far as the number of covered lives through the Medicaid expansion. And there's positive numbers out there, but some of those numbers are artificial because you're forcing people to get health care through the Obamacare exchange because you're saying if you don't get health care, we're going to penalize you. You know, we're going to make you pay for not having health care. These are young, healthy individuals who might not otherwise choose to buy health care. And here in West Virginia, we only have one insurer on the Obamacare exchange for the majority of the state. Some counties have two. And we're seeing nationwide more and more insurers dropping out of the exchange. So now patients have less options, and the options that are remaining are getting expensive. In some places, double. I think it's estimated that West Virginia healthcare costs are going up 20%. I read that the other day. We've seen it on the business side of things. I mean, it's adversely affecting business because our health plan the first year after the ACA passed that we provide for our employees went up 40%. And since then, we've been trying to mitigate costs by increasing deductibles, increasing co-pays, providing options, providing for flexible spending accounts. You know, we're putting money into flex spending accounts for patients or for our employees to pay their deductibles because it's gotten so difficult for them to pay. And you have employees coming to you and say, hey, don't give me a pay raise. If you do, I won't be able to get Medicaid. I can't afford health insurance. I mean, yeah, it's great to look at some of these numbers and say, oh, we're covering more lives, but the system's not fixed. The system's still very broken, and it's only going to get worse. And as a healthcare provider, it scares the mess out of me. As somebody with student loans out the years, going to be paying on them for the next 17 years, and thinking about, you know, what have I invested in, and what's my career going to be like in 5, 10, 15 years? So, yay that we've expanded access to coverage, that's great. I'm glad we have more covered lives, but the system is scary. If you talk to healthcare providers, they will tell you the same thing, that all across this state, people are just waiting for the next shoe to drop.
So you would retain the Medicaid expansion that we have in West Virginia?
I don't know how you take it away now. I don't know how you look at somebody and say, hey, I know you got Medicaid, but you know, we're canceling that program. I mean, we're in. How are we going to pay for it? I don't know. The federal government's ratcheting back how much they're paying towards it. We're going to have to figure it out. And it's still not going to fix our access to healthcare issues, because what good does a Medicaid card to you if you're 3 hours from a doctor? If you're 3 hours from your specialist? And there are people in parts of the state that are that far away from a hospital where that one specialist is that they need. That's an access to care issue.
Do you have any specific thoughts on how the state should pay for its share of the Medicaid expansion?
No, I mean, you know, how are we going to pay for everything that we have? I mean, we're going to have to take a hard look at every single program and saying, you know, are we fulfilling the basic functions of government with this program? You know, are we providing for the public well-being? Are we providing for education? Are we providing for infrastructure? If not, then maybe that goes in the optional pile. You know, how necessary is that program? I mean, it's not going to be pretty. And there's going to be people screaming about, you know, the cancellation of their program. I mean, you know, we had conversations in the House talking about taking a slice of the fairs and festivals money away, and you'd have thought that you were recommending that people were shocked. I mean, people were fighting mad over the possibility of taking money away from their county fair. And I love county fairs. My wife is Queen Ceres in Preston County. I love county fairs, love buckwheat cakes. But, you know, we just have to look at these programs that we're sponsoring as a state and saying, you know, is this a necessary function of government, or is there some other way that we can pay for it?
Senator, any thoughts on how West Virginia should pay for its share of Medicaid expansion in the future?
No, not really. I mean, it's going to be the same challenge we have on paying for anything that's important. I mean, we're going to have to operate government more efficiently, and we're going to have to be open to, revenue enhancements if we can't operate government efficiently enough to balance the budget.
Anything else?
I just have one more question. How many other medical providers are in the legislature?
Let's see. We got my roommate who's a physician. We have OBGYN, that's 2. We have Dr. Stallings is 3. Takuba's 4. And then we have some other, healthcare providers, nurses, and physical therapists, and so we've got 10.
How many attorneys?
In the Senate, there are myself, Charlie Trump, Mike Wokel, Mike Romano, maybe 4, and I quite honestly have no idea how many there are in the House.
Quite a few. This election is about choices. From the top to the bottom, it's about choices. And I just want people to know that in this race, it's about, do you want a small government? Do you want a leaner government, a more efficient government? Or do you want a big government and big spending and taxes to go on top of taxes to go on top of taxes to pay for it? And that's, I am of the conservative persuasion, and I'm focused on running a leaner and more efficient government. And if that's what makes sense to you, then support me. I want to make sure that we have provided for our children, both on the education and the healthcare side of things. I want to continue my fight against the substance abuse epidemic. Proud to be leading on that in the House. Proud to be the Vice Chair of the Substance Abuse Committee. Proud to have introduced over 20 pieces of legislation, co-sponsored and sponsored pieces of legislation dealing with the substance abuse epidemic. So those are the types of things that I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about West Virginia and making this a better place to live. But fundamentally, you just have to look at our core principles and decide, do you want to side with somebody who's going to be more conservative, both on economic issues, social issues, or do you want to side with somebody who's going to be on the big government side of things, who has a proven track record of increasing taxes and spending more money over his service in the Senate?
I'll respond to what Delegate Stansberry said. I mean, I'm not sure about my track record of spending more money, having supported the elimination of the business franchise tax, the food tax, and the reduction of the corporate net income tax. So I've certainly supported far more reductions in taxes than I have increases in taxes. But, I'm not going to be closed-minded to doing whatever it is we need to do to balance our budget. I mean, I'm not a big spending tax guy. I mean, I never have been, and I'm not going to be. But I'm not going to say we can't do that. I'm not going to pledge to some out-of-state interest that I will do X and not support what's best for the state of West Virginia. So I think it's unfair to characterize me as a big spending liberal kind of person when I've supported plenty of reductions in taxes over the course of the time I've been in the legislature. So I would like to see us also run a more efficient government, a leaner government, and if we can do that without raising taxes, that'd be my preference too. But my guess is we can't do that. And we're going to have to find some revenue enhancement somewhere. Now, what the best one is, I really don't know. But we've got to be able to make the difficult choices. I mean, it's going to be difficult to as Delegate Stansberry said, I mean, when we try to cut fairs and festivals and people go crazy, I mean, we're going to have to do a lot more than that. I mean, it's a lot more difficult than cutting fairs and festivals, and we couldn't come up with the political will to do that. We need to have the leadership in the legislature to make the difficult choices, to make the cuts we need to make, and balance the budget moving forward. So I'm someone who, in my time in the legislature, has worked across the aisle, supported plenty of Republican things, and when I think they're wrong, I call them out on it. But when I think they're right, I cheer them on, and I'm happy to support it. So I'm someone who I think works well with both parties, has done that during my course in the legislature, and as long as I'm there, I'll continue to do that.
Well, thank you both very much for attending. A very interesting session.
Thank you.